Hello everyone. So my name is Dylan Young. I am a Sitecore Technology MVP, and tonight I'll be continuing my series on Sitecore Docker and how to get going with using this technology in your solution. So in my last video, I covered how to create a solution, get running with that solution, and pushing those changes that you might be making in your solution out to your Docker images or your Docker containers that you're spinning up. So today's video will cover how to configure Unicorn with this setup. I'm going to do a video also on TDS as well, just so we can cover all bases with that. But I think you're going to be using one of those different approaches with your local environments that you're working with. To get started with this, we're going to use the solution I was using in my last video when I was showing how to get set up and start working with your solution in a Docker, basically a Docker realm. So you should have all the source that I previously were working on. If I were you, I would be setting up this locally so you can kind of go through the steps that I'm going through. So from that last video, all I had created was a module, a project level module or project layer module that represented just the demo site that I was creating. In this video, I'm going to create a foundation level module that represents our serialization, which in this video is using Unicorn, like I said. So to get started, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and add a new project. Actually, one step back before I do that is actually I'm going to create a new solution folder. So I will call this Serialization. And then inside here, I will create a new project. I'll just select the recently used project templates of ASP.NET Web Application for .NET Framework. Click Next. And as I've been following with the other video, I will just call this website to represent the code that I will be changing. And then I'll click on the ellipses here and go into source. I am going to create a new folder for foundation. And then inside of the foundation folder, I'm going to create another folder called Serialization. And select that folder. Actually, yeah, that's correct. So website and then that folder, and then I will be using, I believe I'm using 4.72 for all my, so 4.72, if it doesn't work, then we'll change it back. But I believe I'm using 4.72 for all the other projects in my solution. So I'll do create. I'm going to select empty, MVC, and I'm not going to select that option, but I'll just click create. And so now that that's done, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this website. So I am just going to call this, training.foundation.serialization. And I'm just going to copy this. Control A, just so I can go into properties now and just change the assembly names and the default namespace on this. Control S and save those changes. And then typically what I'll do next, and this is why a lot of people use starter kits and maybe some Yeoman or something like that to automatically spin up these projects, is that now you have to go through the step of deleting some of this stuff. You'll delete those. I could also delete controllers and models as well. I also typically delete global.asix just because I don't need it for anything. And then you want to change the properties on your web config. You'll want to just make it set to none. So no build action is none, and then it's already set to do not copy to the output folder. Go back and I will do that to the views web config as well. Like I said, it's just general process that I always follow on every time I create a new module project. All right, so now that we have the project created, the next step is we're going to add our dependency of Unicorn into this folder. So it's as simple as just doing manage NuGet packages. Go into browse and then searching for Unicorn. We're going to select Unicorn. 4.1. I'm going to select lowest. That should be the right dependencies that be pulled in. And I'll just click install. And then it's going to basically pull in all the things it needs in order to run Unicorn. It comes with this little README. We don't need this for this course because it's a pretty simple process to get us all configured. So when it does that, it basically creates this app config folder inside include. Inside this, there's some configuration. There's kind of a root configuration that it defines. I don't know if I've done a video on Unicorn before, but there's essentially some basic configuration it adds. But there's going to be, we're really going to want to also set up some base configurations that kind of point to basically tells it where our serialized files live. The serialized YAML files that it creates that represent what's in your database. And then what you're doing with this process is you're essentially setting up this configuration. These Unicorn files are going to be pushed out to your Sitecore solution, and then it basically needs to communicate between disk and your database and determine the differences between the two. Typically, it's going to take what's in your disk as the master, or what should be in your database based on that, based on configuration rules that you've defined. I wouldn't say that always is the master. Depends on what you've configured in your configuration. So to get started with this, I'm going to start with some configuration files, like I mentioned. The first one I'm going to create is inside the include folder, not necessarily inside your Unicorn folder. I'm going to create a environment.config. So I'll just call this environment.config. This is where you specify where those files are going to sit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this from another notepad I have open, instead of having you watch me type all this. Now, what's kind of strange about this is you're specifying C serialization, and that might seem a little strange, but that's actually going to represent the location in your Docker container, not necessarily. So essentially, C serialization does not exist on your local machine. It's going to exist in your essentially your Docker container. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set up the process of deploying to a specific folder inside our deploy path, where all of the files kind of get copied from this path to this C serialization path. So we're going to go through that process. That way, this being set up like this means that all developers are going to have it essentially in the same location, and it's just going to be what gets checked in the source control is going to actually be our deploy folder, or essentially output folder that we're putting these files into. So the other configuration I want to configure is just a basic Unicorn base configuration. This is going to be useful for later on when we start building things. So I'm just going to call this unicorn.base.config. And so it's open. Let me just copy this from the other file. So Control A-V. And so, like I said, this just has base configurations. What you name these doesn't have to be exact. So what you would do is, let's say we're creating a new feature, and we're creating a feature for navigation, for example. You would, when you define your Unicorn configuration for that module that you're creating, you would have it extend from the helix.feature base configuration. So that when it picks up this essentially this configuration, it's going to automatically pull in templates, renderings, and media items for that feature layer module that you've defined. If you didn't want it to do that necessarily, you don't have to inherit from it. You could just inherit from your Helix base, and then it would always just pick up. It would just have just the base configuration that basically specifies where it's located and things like that. And so yeah, so that's the. I won't go too deep into Unicorn. You can watch other videos about how Unicorn works specifically, but that's a general sense of. And then the other thing I'm going to want to do is I'm probably going to want to open up my Docker Compose file and make some changes to that file. So let's open up Docker Compose. And what I want to do is really make changes just to our CM. We don't really want to make changes to the CD because the CD doesn't need to necessarily, basically the changes that we're going to make are only going to, you really only want to sync up with your CM. You're not going to want to sync those up into the CD environment, if that makes sense. You're going to publish changes from your CM into your CD for content items. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new volume in here. And it's just going to be volume deploy / serialization. So we're just going to publish or keep track of things for source control in our serialization folder. And you don't have to have this in the same location as where I'm specifying it. It's up to you how you do that. And then basically this local one on our machine will map to that C serialization folder that I was talking about before, which was in our environment config. So let's save those changes. And so that's pretty good. What I want to do next is I want to also copy the publish profile from our project layer module into our foundation serialization folder. So let's just paste that in. And so now we should be able to publish this. Now keep in mind, it doesn't always pick it up right away, so we will need to unload. Save all those changes, unload, and then reload this. And now you should be able to publish, debug. So we're just going to go ahead and do this, and hopefully I'm not forgetting a step in this. So we'll just go ahead and publish. And then we are going to just take a look at the file system real quick. One second, let me get this up. All right, so here is our folder. So it hasn't deployed anything it hasn't obviously created the serialization folder, and I'll show how to get that to start showing up here in a second. But it has published stuff into our bin and things like that. So the next piece that we really need for stuff to start showing up is we're going to need to actually configure a configuration file for Unicorn that's for a specific module. So not these base configs. We're going to need to define a configuration for a specific project. So what we'll do is we'll do it for this demo project. So what we'll do first is we'll just define a folder called app config. And inside the app config, we'll create a include folder. And inside the include folder, we'll define a folder called project. And inside that folder, we'll create a new configuration file. We'll call it project.demo.serialization. And inside this folder, we're going to want to define a basic configuration. I will manually type this configuration out because I don't have one written out for this specific video. I will skip most of this so you can just see the end result of me typing this out. Going in there and we're telling it to reserialize, I believe is the name of the action we're going to take. If we don't create the things it expects as part of helix.project inside our Sitecore solution, it's going to throw an error. It's going to say we're missing stuff. So that might be something we need to take a look at. So anyways, either way, we're just going to save that change, and then we're just going to publish this as well. And at any point, you can just check to see how this was working. So I just published it, and now we can see our project.demo inside our deploy/website folder. And so this is the folder that is used as a volume that gets pulled into our Docker container. So the next step that we're going to want to do is you're going to want to open up a Windows PowerShell window or a command prompt, and you're going to want to do a Docker compose. So we're going to use the Docker basic straight out Docker compose I talked about in my last course. Docker compose up, and then one parameter I didn't talk about much was the -d. This actually removes all those outputted kind of log information that gets displayed, and I actually have found that this is quite useful and quite clean. So you can actually get your Docker image or your Docker container spun up pretty quickly, and you'll know that they're actually done when this process is done. You just have to remember to, if you're done with it, you actually have to run a Docker compose down at that time. So we'll just run that, and it will take probably a couple of minutes at most. We'll just wait for this to essentially run the rest of the way. All right, so we got our first error, and I actually know what causes this error. So if you ever have a situation where you get this error, it's basically saying that your if we go back to our file system and we go back to deploy, it's actually saying that our serialization folder doesn't exist here. And so this is kind of, I think I talked about this in my last video, where you have to always have this website folder here. You also would also need to make sure your serialization folder is always here. And one way to do that is to put a .get keep file in here and just make sure that gets checked in the source control. That way that stuff is always present. So we'll just paste it. And so this should show up as an option for us to check in via source control, which I'll show that option as well here at the end of this video. So now it should allow us to spin this up. Let me just make sure that it didn't leave those other containers running. It did. So I can do a Docker compose down. So it's removing the network. And so now that's done. And now we'll do Docker compose up -d. And we'll wait for that to run. All right, so now it's saying that our Docker containers for the Docker training are spun up and ready to go. So now we should be able to just go on over to the browser and type in localhost 4401, and we'll just go to Sitecore because we want to log in right away. All right, another error. This is the exact same error I had last time when I did this video for my last video that we had, where I was setting up the solution. It's an error because it's using the wrong version of MVC here. So again, it's just a simple process of going manage what's installed from a .NET MVC perspective, just downgrading these to 5.2.4. I'm just going to change ignore, and I'll do update. Accept. And 3.2.4, ignore dependencies, update. Okay, accept. And then I am going to do, let's see, this one, 3.2.4, ignore, update. And I believe that's it. Let me just double check real quick. So these guys, and I don't think that's, yeah, we'll say that's good. So the next thing we should do is just publish this again. So we'll click publish. And now it's dropped it into our folder that we had. So now it's dropped it in our website, and it's hard to see, but the deployment was a few minutes ago at 10:15. So we should see our training.foundation serialization files were deployed at 10:15. So they should be there. And now we should be able to refresh this, and it should start working. All right, so we are now basically came to the Sitecore login screen. So I'll just go ahead and log in. And then basically from here, I will jump on over to, there's one thing I want to look at before I do that. So what we did in this Docker training, the new serialization that we set up, and when we configure this project configuration, we defined that it would inherit from Helix project. Let's take a look at the unicorn base file here. It's going to expect that you have some of this defined in your content tree before we can run that reserialization. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna just go through and create a folder in all these locations. Let me just push this to the side, and then what I'll do is go to the content editor inside here. All right, now that that's up, now we'll go through this process. So I am just going to insert, and I'm just going to create folders for these. That's the quickest, easiest way to get this represented. In future videos, I'll probably go a little bit further and maybe start going through some actual training with these, what we're basically setting up. So give it a couple seconds for it to load up the insert from window. Fortunately, a little slow still. There we go. And so we'll just create a folder. Underneath comment is always going to be a folder template. And so the first item is the content, and we're just going to call this, it's looking for modules. So the module here is demo. Templates, we're going to go down here. Now these, as part of Sitecore, newer versions of Sitecore, they actually have these foundation feature and project folders here by default. So we're just going to keep those there, and we just need, inside the project level, we just need to create one called demo. So that's there. We need to create one for the renderings. So we'll go up to layout, renderings, the layer, which is already here. And then we'll just create another rendering folder called demo. Then we need one for media. So actually media is next, but we'll actually skip that one and do layout real quick because we're already in that folder. We'll go to layouts, and then we will go to layer, which is already here, and then we'll just create a new folder in here, new layout folder called demo. So all the layouts specific stuff is there, and then we'll do the media one. The media one is technically going to be a folder for project to represent that. We could give it the same icon as the other projects here if we wanted to, but I'm just trying to get past this quick, so I'm not going to go to that much detail. But we can then do demo, and then we're good. So the next step is the basic reserialization process. So to do that, all we need to do is go to unicorn.aspx. And this is present because we've published all the unicorn configuration things as part of our serialization project to our unicorn or Sitecore Docker containers website. So now we have this option to reserialize. So that's what we'll do. And now reserialize things. So because it's, when we click reserialize, what it's going to do is it's going to put all these items into the C serialization folder. Because that's a volume mapped to our local file system, we'll also see it in that location as well. So we should be able to go to the bin folder, back up to deploy, and under serialization, we now should see all the stuff that was defined. So kind of several levels deep, but essentially these are all the items that are represented in our Sitecore solution that is running inside a Docker container. So now the next step you would do here is you would check these files in. And so if we go back to our Docker training, and we go to, and this is something I realized after doing the video the last one I did on the solution setup, I didn't really go through the check-in process for that stuff. So I'll do that in this video. So some of the stuff that's here, let's just shrink some of the stuff because it's trying to check in more than I wanted to. So let's go through some of this stuff and make sure it's configured properly. So we definitely want this stuff here to check in. And so we'll stage this stuff. And we also want to bring in all this source stuff. Let's just confirm that this all looks good. So it's basically just properties, and I think that all looks good. And then we have some changes to our website, and I think that looks good. Environment, we want clean data, Docker compose. So yeah, we pretty much want everything here. So we'll just check this in real quick. We'll just call this unicorn configuration changes. So I'll check these in. And now we're left with essentially some things that I don't necessarily want. Oh, I forgot to stage those. Configuration changes. All right, so we need to go through and actually work on our get ignore rules so that we, and really I don't have to really record this, but I'm just going to show it anyways because it could be useful. One thing I want in here is to include that get ignore file. So I will include an existing item. I'll do get ignore. So now I can see my get ignore things. So some of the things I typically define in here is I would want, and it's useful to have the Team Explorer open. If you're going to use you know, command line or whatever, you can definitely go that route if you want for checking in files. But I usually use Visual Studio just because it's pretty straightforward. But I like to have it open so that when I save changes to this file, it actually update what's showing up over here, so I know if I'm writing the right rules that I want so that I can achieve. What we would really want here is that we show when we keep all these folders with the .get keeps, but some of this other stuff, we don't want all these indexes and things checked into source control because they're going to be spun up by each person's environment when they do a Docker compose, and so we don't want that. But there is, in the deploy path, we don't necessarily want the stuff inside website either to be checked in because those are going to be specific to that person's environment as they do publishes and things like that. And we'll set up some processes to clear out what's in that website folder as well. But what is in the serialization folder, we would want to check in because those are specific to changes that they're making and that we're wanting to keep in track of via source control. So the rules we'll need is essentially stuff like this, and some of this I've already written so that it's kind of like a cheat sheet of stuff that makes this a little bit easier that you guys don't have to worry about it as much. So that should take care of all these other folders now. So now it's basically the rule is saying we're going to ignore all files that are underneath data. And then the only files that we're going to worry about and will allow to be checked in are the .get keep files. So that's essentially what this rule is saying. Then we also would want to do this in the deploy folder. So the same sort of thing here. Now, if we just do that, we won't see much changes. We won't see all our deploy stuff come in, but we will want to keep in deploy. And I'm confused why I don't see it there, but hold on a second. Deploy .star .get keep exclude deploy serialization from this updated get ignore. And so that's it. So hopefully you've learned a lot from this. I have created a playlist for all these Sitecore Docker videos. So please keep an eye on that for any updates or any new videos that are coming out on Sitecore Docker. If you're enjoying the series or if you enjoy any of my other videos, please subscribe to the channel. That's the best way to get the latest updates on things that are coming out, either or give you opportunities to also vote on new content that would be coming out. All right, thank you and good luck.